Hi guys, just the update to my little work in progress canyon run. You can see that I have an actual vehicle now in the center of the screen, and you can rotate that using the x-axis of the analog stick. Controls are analog, so the further you tilt the stick, the faster you rotate. The vehicle model is temporary, and if you press button 4, you will accelerate. Collisions are modeled, so if you hit a wall, you'll bounce off of it. Right now, the only adverse effect to that is it slows you down, but eventually you'll take damage, and if you take enough damage, explode as dramatically as I can achieve with the limited storage space of this thing. So I guess I'll just kind of race around a little bit now and show you what that looks like. I apologize for how flickery the video is. I honestly have no idea how to video the Vectrex in any way that comes close to doing the actual machine justice, but suffice it to say that it looks 1,000 times better in person. This is actually running at about 40 hertz right now, which I'm quite happy with. I originally was targeting 50 just from what I read, but really the flicker isn't really noticeable at 40. I think as long as I can keep it around there, I'll be happy. This level is, I originally created this for the engine demo video that I did before, and the purpose of it was really just to kind of stress test the engine with a level that was about as complicated as anything I expected would be seen in the final game, but it wasn't meant to actually represent a real level, and so it wasn't meant to actually be fun. It actually just starts repeating elements at some point, but I've actually found that this is pretty fun just to drive around on, so hopefully that bodes well for the final game. There are certainly other gameplay elements that I would like to add. I was originally thinking that this was just going to be like a time trial kind of a thing, but honestly this is going to be pretty boring if this is all there is to it. So one thing I might do is, right now there's only one button that does anything, but I might have another button be like a speed boost or something, or maybe make some kind of modification to the steering. But what I would really like to do is have some things like different gameplay modes where something could be like chasing you, or you could be racing with AI vehicles. And if I can achieve enough variety of these gameplay modes, I'd like to string them together to form a story arc. I already have a story in mind. I'm just not sure if I'm going to be able to do everything that I want to do with the limited resources of the platform. So no promises, but that's kind of the ultimate vision right now. This level, I don't know what this is. This is just a bunch of 90-degree turns. The challenge of the gameplay is really in the amount of drift that there is in the vehicle and anticipating that, because if you turn too late around a corner, you'll oversteer and that'll make you lose momentum. But if you turn too early, you risk crashing into a wall. So you kind of have to learn the physics of the vehicle and anticipate what it's going to do. I wanted there to be a learning curve so that it wouldn't be like you just start playing it and it's super easy, but at the same time I didn't want it to be frustrating. I think there's a pretty good medium right now. I may tweak some of the parameters to the physics, but I don't anticipate any major changes at this point. And this level is kind of the exact opposite. It's just a bunch of curves, and it really makes me glad that the Vectrex has an analog stick, because this is very difficult in just on-off mode. I think that the analog stick is one of the greatest assets that the Vectrex has. It's very unusual for consoles of that era, and I wish more games took advantage of it. And this is not a very interesting track. But I should mention that all of the tracks that I have are just temporary. None of them are going to appear in the actual game. I am eventually going to create a track editor that will allow me to do more than I can with the simple utility that I have for building tracks right now. But that's probably going to be one of the last things that I do. So in the foreseeable future, the tracks are just going to be kind of these temporary things. So for those of you who are still with me and are interested, I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got to the current point in terms of controls and some of the things that I tried that didn't really work. What you're looking at here is I guess it's more of a simulator than an emulator that I wrote to help me with development. And I'm using it because I did all of my prototyping using floating point numbers, which aren't supported in hardware on the Vectrex. But anyway, I had originally said that I planned to use asteroids-esque physics for this game, and that was what I originally tried. And I'll illustrate that here. And what I found was that it really wasn't very fun. I'm not aware of any racing games that have used controls like this before, but there's probably a very good reason for that. I think that this is an example of having a bit too much of a learning curve, and I don't know if I would ever actually even get good at this. So then I thought, well, what if I keep the same physics but change the controls so that instead of you rotating the ship with the analog stick, you would actually control exactly where it pointed, and that would give you a bit more directional control. And this, I guess it improved things a little bit, but aside from the fact that it's not particularly realistic, it still is pretty difficult to control, and I didn't find it to be very fun. So then I thought, what if instead of using an on-off button for thrust, I made the degree to which you tilted the analog stick control the amount of thrust. That way you would have analog directional control as well as analog thrust control. And this made it quite a bit more playable, actually, but it still wasn't really what I was looking for. And it still is pretty difficult to control. I'll show you an example on this level, which is a bit crazier, just to give you an idea about how much harder it is for me to control this versus what it eventually became. So I was trying to do something novel so the game wouldn't be like, every other top-down racing game you ever played, but I was finding that that was not really going very well, so eventually decided that I would take a more conventional approach after all those failed attempts. So that is where we ended up, and this is the roughly final version before I converted the numbers to fixed point. Anyway, now that I can run the game on actual Vectrex, there are a few things that I noticed that weren't so noticeable in emulators before that I wanted to kind of talk about. One of them is, I already mentioned, the flickering, the fact that I think 40 Hz is quite fine. The other has to do with the fact that I'm clipping lines at the screen edge, and kind of an unintended effect of that is that when the lines get really short, they get really bright, and it's just due to the fact that it's drawing the lines with the same number of cycles regardless of how long they are. So for example, if you look at this line over here, it's being clipped at the screen edge, and as it gets shorter, it gets brighter and brighter, and it gets really bright just before it gets clipped completely. And you see the same thing when lines fade in. Like right here, there's a new line, so it's really bright. I don't like that when you're racing around the track. You just kind of see these glints of light, and it looks kind of weird. So I might try and do something about that. Really, I'm not even sure if I even need to be clipping lines. If I didn't clip them, the effect wouldn't be present at all. The reason I'm clipping them is I was concerned about getting a flaring effect. It's pretty noticeable on V-Day when lines are drawn off the screen. But I don't think that it's that bad on a real Vectrex, and I say that because some of these lines aren't clipped, in particular the lines that are linking the top and bottom surfaces over here. And I don't see any kind of adverse effect when they're being drawn off of the screen. So, I don't know. I know some people are concerned about potential damage to the display from overscan. Truthfully, I am pretty much strictly a software guy. I don't know very much about electronics, so I don't know if that's a valid concern or how much of a concern it is. But I may be kind of looking into that some, see what I can do to reduce that effect. Another thing that's kind of prominent is when you have lines like this that are adjacent but in the same direction, there's a very obvious break between them, and it just looks kind of ugly. Not a huge deal, but it may be something that I will look into resolving at some point. So I guess that's all for now. If you have any comments, any feedback, I would love to hear them, and thanks for watching.